You won't believe what happened one Friday night. It completely shook my world. It started off as one of those calm evenings at home. My husband and I were just relaxing, sipping wine, and chatting about random stuff. It was peaceful, and honestly, I thought it would stay that way. But then, out of nowhere, um, he asked me something that caught me completely off guard. He casually asked if I'd ever thought about being with other men. At first, I laughed, thinking it was some weird joke, but he wasn't joking. He went on to say he wasn't talking about just any men. He meant black men, 3 of them. Um, my heart started pounding, and I wasn't sure if I was more shocked or uncomfortable. Who even says something like that? I stared at him, waiting for him to crack a smile or give me some clue that this was all a joke, but he was dead serious. Um, um, I felt so uneasy, hoping this was just some passing comment. But he didn't drop it. It started with teasing uh, remarks, little jokes about how it could be fun. Then he got more serious, saying it might spice up our relationship. He tried to frame it as a one-time thing that could make things exciting. I couldn't even process what he was saying. How was I even supposed to respond to something like that? Was I expected to just say yes? Um, was this some kind of test? I didn't know what to think. And as the days went by, the topic kept creeping into our conversations. At first, I tried to shut it down, quickly changing the subject or coming up with excuses, but my husband wouldn't let it go. He even started mentioning specific friends of his, saying they were cool, respectful, and that nothing had to happen unless I wanted it to. He kept framing it as something lighthearted, just for fun. Um, every time he brought it up, my stomach would twist into knots. I couldn't bring myself to tell him how much it bothered me. Part of me didn't want to spark an argument, but another part of me felt this growing resentment. Where one night he took it a step further and suggested we meet these 3 men. He made it sound casual, just a harmless hangout with his friends. I hesitated, wondering if this was another attempt to push me into something I wasn't comfortable with. But for the sake of keeping the peace and not risking our marriage over what I hoped was just a bad idea, I reluctantly agreed. I, uh, that evening we met his friends at a local bar. They seemed nice enough, polite, charming, maybe even a little too friendly. But there was an awkwardness in the air, an unspoken understanding between them and my husband that I couldn't ignore. It made me sick to my stomach. As the night went on, the drinks kept flowing and the conversations turned flirty. I tried to laugh it off, but inside I felt completely out of place. One of the men kept giving me lingering looks, and every time I caught him staring, my chest tightened. Um, my husband, meanwhile, seemed totally at ease, smiling like he was just enjoying watching me get all this attention. Um, eventually, we ended up back at our house. I didn't want to, but my husband insisted it would be more relaxed to hang out there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something I wasn't prepared for. Once we were home, the atmosphere shifted. The guys were joking around on the couch, but there was a tension in the air that made my skin crawl. I stayed in the kitchen trying to keep myself busy when one of them came in to help me. At that moment, I didn't know what I felt: fear, excitement, or something else entirely. It was as if I was teetering on the edge of something dangerous. That's when it hit me. I had let this go way too far. I needed to leave not just the kitchen, but the whole situation. Yet every time I tried to move, it felt like something invisible was holding me back, keeping me stuck in place. The air around me felt heavy, almost suffocating. I needed to get out of there, but it felt like my feet were glued to the floor. The man standing next to me wasn't backing off, and the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. He leaned in closer, his breath against my ear, and whispered something that made my stomach turn. You look like you want this. Though that sentence snapped me out of my frozen state. I backed away quickly, bumping into the counter behind me, desperate to create space between us without causing a scene. My heart was pounding, my face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. I needed to end this, but my mind was racing. I glanced at the doorway, hoping my husband would walk in, maybe sense that things had gone too far, but he didn't. At that moment, I realized he wasn't going to. He had put me in this situation in the first place, and now I was on my own. Pushing past the man, I headed to the living room, where the other two were laughing with my husband as if nothing was wrong. No one seemed to notice the tension or the panic I was feeling. My husband glanced at me and smiled, either completely unaware of my turmoil or, worse, indifferent to it. I sat on the edge of the couch, gripping the cushions so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind replayed the scene in the kitchen over and over. How close I had come to crossing a line I wasn't ready for. I wanted to speak up, to tell my husband that this wasn't fun or exciting for me, but the words wouldn't come. The night dragged on, each moment heavier than the last. The men kept drinking and laughing, and my husband acted as if everything was perfectly normal. But nothing about this was normal. I kept thinking about how powerless I'd felt, how close I'd come to losing control of the situation. It wasn't just scary, it made me angry. Ugh. How could my husband put me in this position? How could he be so casual about my feelings as if they didn't matter? Um, Finally, the men got up to leave. A wave of relief washed over me as they walked out the door. For the first time that night, I felt like I could breathe again. But the tension didn't disappear. It lingered, simmering beneath the surface. The next morning, when they left, I turned to my husband. He was still smiling, as though he had just hosted the perfect evening. I couldn't hold it in anymore. What was that? I asked, my voice trembling. What do you mean? He replied, looking genuinely confused, like he had no idea what I was upset about. That, I said, motioning toward the door. That whole thing, what were you thinking? He shrugged, his casual demeanor only fueling my frustration. It was just a bit of fun. You didn't have to do anything you didn't want to. Yeah. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Fun? I said, my voice rising. You call that fun? You put me in a situation where one of your friends was all over me and you just sat there like it was nothing. For the first time that night, his expression changed. The smile disappeared, replaced by a flicker of realization. But instead of apologizing, he got defensive. I thought you were into it, he said. You didn't say anything. You didn't stop him. Hmm. Oh. Now is it the last straw? I didn't say anything because I didn't know how, I yelled, because I was scared. Do you have any idea how uncomfortable that was for me? How trapped I felt? You're supposed to protect me, not put me in situations like that. I The room fell silent. My husband didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at me as if he didn't know what to do. After what felt like an eternity, he muttered a weak apology, but it didn't feel like enough. That night, I slept in the guest room. I needed space, time to think about what had happened and what it meant for our relationship. I loved my husband, but something had changed. He had crossed a line I wasn't ready for, and I wasn't sure I could forgive him. Looking back, I realized it wasn't just about that night, it was about trust, about feeling safe and respected in a relationship. My husband had broken that trust, and now I had to figure out if I could ever feel comfortable with him again.